all of these different roles you are discharging this afternoon, all because of one purpose, and that is you are trying to communicate to a wide audience what the leadership of the judiciary looks like and what that leadership probably means for the country, and especially for the future. I have to thank your various news organizations represented here. Indeed, it is an honor for me to see all of you here. You have made available to us all these expensive facilities, and I do not take that for granted. You have also made available to us your very precious time. Your presence alone means a lot because you are going to spend time here with me to talk about many things regarding the institution I represent. Our Chief of the Public Information Office, Professor and Attorney Theodore Te, had been constantly proposing to me various ways for me to make a public oral report on the judiciary without turning off the most important ally that the judiciary could have, which is the media, in reaching the general public. You have by now your copies of the text-only version of the annual report. I was warned by Attorney Te that to make a straight report to you out of the annual report, even if it takes much less time than the President's delivery of his SONA address last July, might not be sufficiently responsive to the quick, precise, and fast turnaround time that you in the news organizations require. So it had to take quite some time for me to bridge my world, which is contemplative, which takes a lot of time to gestate ideas, to nurture them into fruition, and before I make my long written decisions, to reach your world, which is made up, for some of you, of quick sound bites, some of you of good visuals, but all with the purpose of trying to communicate as efficiently as possible to the public your thoughts with an efficient use of time. My world, of course, is different. So I thank you that you had been patient with me, because I had to make this transition myself from a judge who is used to dealing with reams of paper to the world that you represent in the most efficient electronic ways possible. But because I am not an expert on these things, and in fact, aside from my short press conference I made way back when I was executive director of the AIM Policy Center for a brief spell, that was my only time when I had a press conference experience. I am not an expert on these things. So he was warning me that I could not deliver a 40-minute address the way I wanted it, an abridged version of a report. But actually, you could tell me later that maybe he is wrong, and you could tolerate more as listening to me for much longer than 10 minutes. I welcomed this Meet the Press session, and you might have asked yourselves why. Because first, it resonates with the policy of transparency that I and the rest of my colleagues in the Supreme Court wants to institute as a way of doing things in the judiciary. Of course, you're all very well aware that we have all our constitutional, legal, and institutional constraints, and there are many things we cannot communicate directly to the public. Because the process, for example, of collegial decision-making is a very private one. But to the extent that we can actually communicate directly to the public all of these things and make these as transparent as possible without impeding our work, we will do that. That is why you might have noticed that we had made available to the public podcasts of the oral arguments. That was a new technology for us. We were not really sure how the public would respond, but we wanted you to understand that the oral arguments was going to support the intense deliberation that was going to accompany every decision-making process that we have, and especially in the most controversial cases. You already have a flavor. Perhaps you can imagine what happens, and they can be very intense when we justices in the court are closeted within our session conference room. I have also asked the PIO to really design a website that will transmit as much information to the public as possible, including understandable and responsive financial reports. COA reports, etc., those are there. In fact, the members of the House Appropriation Committee were quite surprised last August 15, when we had our presentation before the Appropriations Committee, where they saw for the first time that we were going to even tell the entire public what we had been doing with the JDF, the Judiciary Development Fund, how we were distributing the 80% COLA portion to the employees on a monthly basis, how fast it was, and that we were really keeping within the statutory limitation of only keeping 20% for capital outlay and equipment purchases. Those are things that I believe the public should be assured the judiciary has no reason to withhold from it. As the institution that is imbued with the constitutional duty of upholding the rule of law, the transparency policy is in keeping with our desire to assure the public that over time we hope to build a judiciary that you can be truly proud of. Due to the relentless effort also of Professor Te and his team, you can see that they have been issuing quick summaries to you. And I hope that you understand that when they do that, the intense labor that goes into trying to digest very complicated legal questions into those short paragraphs took some time and a lot of effort. We lawyers can tolerate lengthy sentences and lengthy argumentations, but the rest of the public cannot. So this, together with the public coverage of our events, including the live interview of JBC applicants to the most important positions in the country. And the next most important interview will be the interview for the overall Deputy Ombudsman this next week. I'm sorry, no, in the next few weeks. I'll have to check on the date for that. This is important to me as a leader of the institution because I have to always live with the constant reminder that the judiciary itself is constrained in many ways. There are things it cannot do much about. The first is the logistical requirement to support its operations. We basically have no power to dictate how much support is going to be given to the judiciary. So what we need is for the public to understand what we are here for, how important we are to democracy, how we can more efficiently deliver the rendition of justice to the public, and why it is important for the public to communicate to both the executive department and the legislative department that, considering the gargantuan budget availability anyway, could you not increase the budget of 1% or even under 1% that Congress had been allocating the judiciary historically? Imagine the third great branch of government being historically treated budget-wise that way. It is important to make the public understand, for example, that we don't largely have control over the building of our courthouses. We don't have in our budget capital outlay allocations historically for the building of courthouses. Allocations for our court buildings are either given to the Department of Justice, who turns over those courthouses to us when they are finished, or by the local government units. We only have a few houses or buildings that we can actually call our own. So if we are going to strengthen independence of the judiciary, you have to imagine that we must be able to control the kind of physical infrastructure that will house our judges. It is in keeping with our desire to give our public a sense of dignity when they try to seek justice from our courtrooms. How can the public believe that justice will be rendered if our courthouses are dilapidated and they see the judges working under such dire conditions? We also want to communicate to the public the judiciary's serious desire to cut down the backlog of cases at all levels in the court. Allow me. Right now, under the most simple baselining that we have done, we have more than 600,000 cases for lower level courts spread out over roughly 2,000